They arrested him without a shred of evidence, rushed him through the system, and set his bail at $10,000 until a single phone call turned everything around. The summer heat weighed heavily on the air as Jamal Reynolds stepped out his house. The sun beat down relentlessly, pressing like an iron against his skin. He had a simple goal: grab a bottle of Gatorade from Jim's Corner Mart and make it back home before his mom called to check in. He had 10 minutes. Tops. Jamal wasn't the type to linger outside, especially in his neighborhood. Not because it was dangerous, but because people looked at him differently than they did his classmates from Rockford High. As a 16-year-old black kid in a predominantly white suburb, he had learned to walk a fine line. He knew the rules. Keep your hands visible, don't hang around, don't run, and never, ever give them a reason. The cool blast of air conditioning hit him as he stepped into the small corner store. It was cramped, shelves packed with chips and sodas, the air tinged with the smell of stale coffee. Mr. Jim, the store's owner, barely lifted his eyes from his newspaper. A white guy in a polo shirt stood near the counter, his jaw tight as he scanned the aisles with a wary look. Jamal went straight for the drinks, grabbing a blue Gatorade from the fridge, and made his way toward the register. But then something caught his attention. A man in a black hoodie was shoving candy bars into his pockets, moving quickly, his eyes darting toward the door. Jamal barely had a chance to process it before the man bolted, the chime of the door barely finishing before the store alarm screamed through the air. Jamal froze. Mr. Jim leaped from his seat, cursing. The guy at the counter spun toward the door, then suddenly turned his gaze on Jamal. "You're the man," he barked, stepping forward. Jamal's stomach dropped. He was confused what was happening, but the man was already in his space, a hand grabbing his arm. "Let me go," Jamal shouted, yanking back. "Don't move," the man growled, pulling something from his belt. Handcuffs. It was then that Jamal saw it. A badge clipped to the man's belt. An off-duty cop. A wave of realization washed over him. The guy had run out that way. It wasn't him. "That wasn't me," Jamal protested, glancing at Mr. Jim, hoping for some kind of help. But the store owner hesitated, brows furrowed, and then said nothing. Jamal's heart raced. This couldn't be happening. But the officer wasn't listening. He shoved Jamal against the counter, twisting his arms behind his back. "Think you're slick?" the cop muttered. "I didn't do anything." Jamal tried to explain, but his words were drowned out by the sharp click of the cuffs snapping around his wrists. Customers watched, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to capture the scene. But no one stepped in. A siren wailed in the distance, and Jamal's legs went weak. He knew this was bad, really bad. And just like that, a quick trip to grab a Gatorade had turned into flashing lights, handcuffs, and a future that seemed completely out of his control. But the worst part? No one cared to hear his side of the story. The ride to the station felt like it lasted an eternity. Jamal sat stiffly in the back seat, his wrists aching from the tight cuffs, his heart pounding in his chest. The cop driving said nothing, only radioed in that he had a juvenile suspect in custody. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, as though Jamal didn't even exist. Jamal wanted to scream, wanted to make the officer listen. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. The station was a cold, gray building without windows, smelling faintly of sweat and old paper. A place where the world seemed to forget you the moment you stepped inside. The moment Jamal stepped inside the police station, a uniformed officer tugged him forward, guiding him past rows of desks and ringing phones. His sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as they led him toward the holding area. The walls seemed to close in, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a cold glow. At the end of the hallway, a tall, broad-shouldered cop with a badge that read Sergeant Miller looked up from a clipboard. He barely acknowledged Jamal, only letting out a bored sigh. "Shoplifting," Miller muttered, his tone flat and uninterested. The arresting officer, Detective Carl Brewer, nodded, his face expressionless. "Got him at Jim's Corner Mart." The owner didn't see the act, but he was the only one near the shelf when the alarm went off. Jamal's heart dropped. He stiffened. "That's not true," he protested, his voice trembling with frustration. Brewer squeezed his shoulder, so hard that Jamal bit his lip to hold back a yelp. "Shut up," Brewer growled, his grip tightening. Camera footage? Miller asked, glancing up from his clipboard. Not checked yet, Brewer replied, giving a shrug that suggested he didn't care. Kid fits the description. Jamal's stomach churned. Description? That guy was wearing all black with a hoodie. I'm wearing a gray t-shirt and basketball shorts, he said, the panic rising in his chest. But it didn't matter. Miller barely reacted. Take him to processing, he muttered, scribbling something on his clipboard before nodding toward an open doorway. Jamal tried again, his voice shaking but firm. I didn't steal anything. Check the cameras. Ask Mr. Jim. He saw me. But Brewer ignored him. He grabbed Jamal by the arm and yanked him toward a small room where an officer was waiting with a camera. The cold metal of the handcuffs was replaced with the sharp sting of zip ties, and the officer instructed him to stand still for his mugshot. The harsh flash of the camera made Jamal flinch. After that came the fingerprints, the cold, indifferent process of it all. Then came the form. Jamal's hands trembled as he signed it, his signature barely legible. The words juvenile detention pending arraignment stared back at him from the paper, as if they belonged to someone else. Jamal's body felt heavy, like it wasn't even his own. He felt detached, like he was watching all of this happen to someone else, someone who wasn't him. Finally, they led him to a cold metal bench. The zip ties were removed, but the weight of the situation was still there, pressing down on him. The room wasn't a cell, but it felt just as suffocating. It was a holding area with a few other kids slumped against the walls, all of them looking just as lost as he felt. Minutes passed, then an hour. The longer he sat, the more the fear sank in. Would his mom even know where he was? She'd been working late all week, and he hadn't had a chance to call her. What if she called his phone, and it went straight to voicemail? What if she thought he was just out with friends? Jamal's thoughts were interrupted by a creak of the door. His head snapped up, and a public defender in a wrinkled suit stepped in. The man looked about 30, tired, and far from enthusiastic. Jamal Reynolds? He asked, flipping through papers. Jamal's throat went dry. Yeah, he replied, barely able to manage the word. The lawyer sat down, tapping his pen against the folder. You've been charged with shoplifting and resisting arrest. Jamal's chest tightened. That's not. I'm here to represent you for the arraignment, the lawyer interrupted, already moving on. Your hearing is first thing in the morning. Jamal's heart raced. Morning? You mean they're keeping me overnight? Panic clawed at his ribs. I didn't do anything, he said, quieter this time. The lawyer gave a half-hearted sigh. That's what they all say, kid. Jamal sat back, his heart thudding painfully against his ribs. For the first time, it really hit him. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. They weren't going to listen. They were going to bury him under a pile of lies. But tomorrow, everything would change. They just didn't know it yet. Jamal barely slept that night. The hard plastic bench in the holding area left his back aching, and every time he closed his eyes, the reality of what was happening crashed down on him again. By morning, an officer unlocked the door and called his name. Let's go, Reynolds. The walk to the courtroom was a blur of heavy doors and echoing footsteps. His hands were zip-tied again, tight enough that his fingers felt numb. His lawyer, he still didn't know the guy's name, walked beside him, flipping through his notes like he was catching up on the case last minute. Jamal's stomach twisted. He had seen enough courtrooms on TV, but this wasn't entertainment. This was his life. Inside, the air was stale. Rows of wooden benches lined the room, a few scattered people sitting with bored expressions. At the front of the room, the judge's bench loomed high, like a throne. And then there was Judge Warren Kincaid. Jamal's lawyer had said his name like it meant something, like it was bad news. Standing there now, Jamal understood why. Kincaid was an older white man with thin lips and sharp eyes, his gaze cutting through Jamal like a blade. The weight of his stare made Jamal's heart drop, but there was no turning back now. The judge's demeanor was unyielding, the kind that didn't soften, not even in moments of mercy. His robe was perfectly pressed, his gavel resting on the bench as though it had already made its decision. Jamal swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on him. The prosecutor, a young man dressed in a suit that was far too tight, shuffled his papers, and cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was caught at the scene of a shoplifting incident. The store owner activated the alarm, and the arresting officer, Detective Carl Brewer, witnessed him attempting to flee. Jamal's head snapped up. That's a lie, he blurted out, unable to hold back. His lawyer, a man whose expression showed no trace of concern, grabbed his arm. Don't talk unless I tell you to, he whispered firmly. Jamal's chest tightened at the sound of his lawyer's words, a wave of frustration swelling inside him. The judge barely looked up from his papers. Does the prosecution have video evidence? He asked, his voice cold and distant. The prosecutor shifted in place, his discomfort evident. There is surveillance footage, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. Judge Kincaid nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed without it. Jamal's breath hitched in his chest. Without it? Your Honor, his lawyer began, straightening his tie. I ask that we postpone until we can review that footage. Kincaid cut him off with a sharp raise of his hand. Mr. Reynolds was seen in the immediate vicinity. He resisted arrest. The police had reason to believe he was guilty. We have more than enough to move forward. Jamal's legs felt like they might give way beneath him. Everything was moving too quickly. He could barely keep up. But then came the part that froze him to the core. The prosecutor leaned forward, his voice deliberate and chilling. Given the defendant's age, we are requesting that he be tried as an adult. Jamal's stomach dropped like a stone. His lawyer hesitated, then spoke, his voice steady but not convincing. Your Honor, my client is 16. He has no prior record. A charge like this. Kincaid was already shaking his head, his voice firm. We need to send a message. These offenses are not taken lightly in my courtroom. Jamal's hands went numb. Adult court. The words reverberated in his mind like a drumbeat. That meant real prison time. That meant a felony record, one that wouldn't disappear when he turned 18. This wasn't happening. He turned his head, searching the room desperately, hoping to see his mom there, but she wasn't. In that moment, Jamal felt a gut-wrenching sense of isolation, as if the world had spun on without him, leaving him behind. Then his lawyer whispered, Do you have any family you need to call? Jamal's lips parted, but the words got caught in his throat. Oh, they had no idea. His throat felt dry, his pulse racing. He wanted to scream, to tell them to check the footage, to demand that anyone listen. But every time he opened his mouth, the system moved faster than his words could catch up. Judge Kincaid leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the bench with an air of finality. Mr. Reynolds, you are being charged with theft and resisting arrest. Given the circumstances, I am inclined to agree with the prosecution's recommendation. Jamal's stomach twisted painfully. His lawyer raised a hand half-heartedly, as though he knew this was a losing battle. Your Honor, we ask for release under parental supervision while we prepare a proper defense. Kincaid barely reacted. It was as if Jamal wasn't even a person, just another case file to be processed. I don't see a parent present, he said flatly, scanning the courtroom. That tells me everything I need to know. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. She didn't know. His mom didn't know where he was, or that he needed her. She would have been here in an instant if she knew, but she didn't even know he was missing yet. His lawyer cleared his throat. Sir, my client is a minor. We can't assume negligence. Kincaid cut him off with a sharp raise of his hand. I'll allow a public defender's request for a preliminary bail hearing, but I'm not inclined to be lenient. His gaze hardened as he continued. This isn't the first time a young man has stood before me claiming innocence. Jamal felt his chest tighten, the weight of the words sinking into him. This man had already made up his mind. It didn't matter what Jamal said. It didn't matter what was true. Judge Kincaid had already decided his fate. The prosecutor glanced down at his notes. Your Honor, given the severity of the offense and the defendant's resistance during arrest, we request bail be set at $10,000. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. $10,000 for a bottle of Gatorade? His lawyer barely reacted. That's excessive, his lawyer murmured, but Kincaid didn't blink. Bail is set at $10,000. Next case, the judge announced, slamming his gavel down. Jamal's legs locked up beneath him. It was done, just like that. The gavel came down, final and unforgiving, sealing his fate. The officer behind him grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door, the cold reality of it all sinking deeper into Jamal's chest. The officer gripped Jamal's arm, leading him toward the side door, his mind spinning in a haze. His lawyer was already moving on, focused on his next case. Jamal couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His vision blurred as his heart raced. This was it. They were sending him away, unless she found out. He looked up at the officer, his voice hoarse but clear. "Can I call my mom?" The officer didn't even glance at him. "You'll get one phone call when we get back." Jamal swallowed hard, his next words slow and steady, a quiet but undeniable truth. "She's a U.S. Attorney General." The words hit the room like a gunshot. The prosecutor's pen froze mid-signature. His lawyer's head snapped up. Judge Kincaid didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened slightly around the bench. His jaw set a little harder. Everything shifted in an instant. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Detective Brewer, the officer who had arrested him, stared at Jamal, clearly processing the revelation, unsure if he had misheard. The officer gripping Jamal's arm loosened his hold completely, while the public defender blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" he asked, clearly thrown off balance. Jamal felt the tension in the room before he saw it. Judge Kincaid didn't move, but something in the way his jaw tightened, a subtle flicker of unease, told Jamal that things were about to change. He held his ground. "My mom is the U.S. Attorney General." The prosecutor hesitated for a moment. "And her name is?" Jamal's lips curled into a humorless smile. They were scrambling now. "Angela Reynolds," he said, the name rolling off his tongue like it was something important, because it meant power. It meant oversight. And in a room full of people who had thought they could crush him without consequence, it meant trouble. The whispers started immediately. A court clerk shifted uncomfortably, casting a quick glance toward the judge. The bailiff, who had barely looked at Jamal before, now scrutinized him like he was seeing him for the first time. The prosecutor cleared his throat, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "Your Honor, given this new information, perhaps we should reassess the conditions of bail." Judge Kincaid didn't move at first. His fingers tapped once, then twice against the desk, before he exhaled sharply and leaned forward. "You expect me to believe you're the son of a U.S. Attorney General?" Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't need to. "I expect you to let me make my phone call." The room fell into a heavy silence. After a long pause, Kincaid flicked his hand toward the officer. "Take him to holding. We'll verify his claims. If it's a lie, we proceed as planned." Jamal's heart raced as the officer grabbed his arm again. This time, his grip was tentative, uncertain, but it didn't matter. Jamal wasn't lying. And once that phone call went through, everything would change. 20 minutes later, Jamal sat in a small, windowless holding room, his hands resting in his lap. The zip ties had left marks on his wrists, but he barely noticed the sting anymore. Across from him, the officer who had so eagerly pushed him through the system was now sitting with a phone pressed to his ear, nodding too much too quickly. "Understood, ma'am." "Yes, he's safe." "Yes, your Honor is still in the building." "I'll let them know." A beat of silence. Then the officer slowly lowered the phone, meeting Jamal's gaze. "She's on her way," the officer said stiffly. Jamal just nodded. Outside the room, the courthouse was shifting. Conversations had changed tone, calls were being made. A ripple of quiet panic spread throughout the building as the realization hit them. They had just railroaded the wrong kid. And at the center of it all, Judge Kincaid sat behind his bench, his fingers still curled against the wood, his jaw tight. For the first time, he was the one who had something to lose. The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor echoed to the courthouse, sharp and decisive, like a blade cutting through the uneasy silence. Jamal didn't need to see her to know that his mom had arrived. The officer who had taken the call stood up straighter, as if sensing the shift in the air. The courtroom doors, which had swung open so easily for Kincaid's rush verdict, now felt like barriers. Jamal's pulse quickened. The moment his mom walked in, the entire power dynamic of the room would shift, and everything was about to change. As the people in the courtroom exchanged uneasy glances, Unsure what to do next, the door opened, and Angela Reynolds stepped inside. Jamal had never been more relieved to see her in his life. She wasn't just his mother now. She was a force, a storm wrapped in a navy blue power suit, and she was furious. Her eyes locked onto him immediately, her gaze sweeping over him quickly, assessing, checking that he was okay. Then, without missing a beat, she turned toward Judge Kincaid. Kincaid didn't stand, didn't acknowledge her authority in the room. But the way his hands clenched on the desk and how his jaw tightened told Jamal everything he needed to know. He could feel the tension in the air shift. Angela's voice was calm, clipped, and sharp enough to cut glass. "I would like to know," she began, her eyes never leaving Kincaid, "why my son was denied due process." There was a long silence. No one spoke. Kincaid exhaled through his nose, his shoulders stiffening slightly. "Mrs. Reynolds, Attorney General Reynolds," he said, his tone barely hiding his irritation. Angela didn't flinch. "Did you review the footage before setting bail at $10,000? The room went quiet again. The prosecutor, a young man who had been so confident moments earlier, stammered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "The footage hadn't been reviewed at the time of the arraignment," he muttered, his voice faltering. Angela's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "I see. So my son, a minor, was detained without proper evidence, denied access to his legal guardian, and pushed through a system that acted first and verified later?" Kincaid's fingers drummed against the desk, his eyes flickering toward the arresting officer. The arresting officer had reason to believe. Angela stepped closer, her voice dropping low, like a prosecutor dismantling a weak case. "I've reviewed your past rulings, Your Honor." She paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. "You have a pattern." Jamal could feel the shift in the room before he even saw it. A flicker crossed Kincaid's face, not surprise, but recognition. He knew exactly what she was implying. So did everyone else in the room. Angela turned to the bailiff. "I want my son's release paperwork now, and I want every piece of documentation on this case delivered to my office by morning." The bailiff didn't hesitate. Jamal watched in disbelief as the same officers who had treated him like a criminal scrambled to correct their mistake. He could feel it in the air, the shift, the fear. They had messed up and they knew it. The power dynamic had flipped in an instant. Kincaid's gaze darkened, but he said nothing. What could he say? Jamal had walked into this courtroom powerless. But now he was walking out free, and Kincaid was the one under scrutiny. The release process moved faster than Jamal could have imagined. Officers who had ignored him before now rushed to correct paperwork, avoiding eye contact as though he were something radioactive. They barely spoke, and when they did, it was with a sense of fear, not apology. By the time everything was sorted, Jamal barely noticed their presence. It wasn't about their remorse. It was about their fear. When he stepped outside, the sky had shifted to early evening, the heat of the day finally breaking. The courthouse steps were mostly empty, except for one person waiting at the bottom. His mother, Angela Reynolds, stood with her arms crossed, her gaze steady as she watched him walk toward her. There was no anger on her face. Not at him, anyway. Just that fierce, unwavering focus she always had when something was deeply wrong. When Jamal reached her, she exhaled slowly, as though releasing the breath she'd been holding. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jamal nodded, but his voice didn't sound like his own. "Yeah," he said, though the word barely left his lips. She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes seeing past his words to the fear and helplessness he'd carried with him. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "I need you to hear me when I say this," she said quietly. "This was never about you. This was about what they thought you were." Jamal looked away, knowing exactly what she meant. His mom didn't need to explain it further. He already understood. She sighed, glancing back at the courthouse. "Judge Kincaid has been doing this for years," she said, her voice growing darker. "Rushing cases, handing out harsh sentences to kids who look like you, while others walk free for worse." Jamal's stomach twisted. No one had stopped Kincaid before, and they certainly hadn't stopped him that day. His mom's voice dropped even further, laced with anger. "And no one will until someone like me forces them to." People tried, but no one had enough power to make it hurt. Jamal let that sink in. Today, they had tried to bury him without hesitation. If his mother had been anyone else, if he had been anyone else, he'd be trapped in a system designed to break him. Angela took a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. That's why I do what I do, Jamal. Not because I want power, but because I know who they use it against. Jamal felt something shift inside him. She was right. They only stopped today because they were afraid of who was watching. And that meant maybe next time there wouldn't be anyone watching at all. His mother squeezed his shoulder one last time before leading him toward the car. As Jamal climbed in, he glanced back at the courthouse steps, the place that had tried to erase him in a single afternoon. Not today, not ever again. But the real question was, how many others had already been lost? Some people get lucky. Jamal did, but too many don't. This isn't just one story. It's a reality, a system that decides innocence based on who you are, not what you did. A system that counts on no one being powerful enough to fight back. Judge Warren Kincaid didn't just lose a case that day. Within weeks, his courtroom was under federal review. Cases were re-examined. The system that had protected him turned on him the moment it was no longer convenient. Power only bows to power, and when the right people are watching, the whole game changes. But the real fight? It's making sure the next Jamal isn't alone in that courtroom. If you believe stories like this need to be told, make sure to subscribe. The more eyes on the truth, the harder it is for injustice to hide.